the cerebellum. The cerebellum is found at the lower back portion of the head, of it here, at the region we call the occiput. Just like with the cerebrum, please don't confuse this, this is cerebellum. Just like with the cerebrum, it is divided into two hemispheres. Two hemispheres, the left and the right hemisphere. Again, it is folded on the surface, just like with the cerebrum, to increase surface area. The folds here are called the folium. And the two hemispheres also are connected by a band of nerve fibers, just like we saw with the cerebrum. In that case, it was the corpus callosum. In this case here, we are having the vermis, a strip of muscle of band nerve fibers, the vermis, to allow communication between the two hemispheres. And if we look within the cerebellum, we will see these whitish structures, look like branches that together form a tree. Hence, we call this pattern the tree of life. In Latin, arbor vitae, the tree of life. These white patches represent white matter, the medulla. And around the white patches, just around the white patches where we don't have white, this on the outside here, we have, again, if we have white matter, then we expect to have gray matter. Okay, so white matter, the medulla, gray matter, the cortex. And I want us to again look at the pattern here. It's just exactly like we saw in the cerebrum. The pattern, the arrangement of the matter here is such that gray matter again is on the outside and white matter is on the inside. In this case, the white matter forms the tree of life. The cerebellum, what then is its function? The cerebellum is involved in all voluntary movements. Please don't confuse this with the function of the cerebrum. One of the functions of the cerebrum was to be involved in all voluntary actions. So we have two things here. We have action, we have movement. How do we remember it? Action starts with letter A and movement starts with letter M. If I'm moving from up downwards, because the cerebrum is up and the cerebellum is down, moving up downwards, I'm sure I'm following the normal alphabetical order of letters coming up to down. I'm sure A comes before M, so that I know, since they are all controlling voluntary something, then the cerebrum will control voluntary actions because A comes first, while the cerebellum that we are looking at presently will then control voluntary movements because M comes after A. Voluntary movements like what? Like walking, running, jumping. And added to that, the cerebellum also controls balance, equilibrium, posture, muscle tone, how tense your muscles are. Are they contracted? Are they relaxed? Cerebellum is what controls it. And that is also the reason why if you sustain a damage on the cerebellum, you might not be able to do any muscular activity, including running, moving, running, jumping. Okay, so that's how sensitive the cerebellum is. The medulla oblongata. It is found around the brain stem. It forms a primitive part. This is the primitive part of the brain, not too developed. Okay, but it forms a connection between the main portions of the brain and the spinal cord. The medulla oblongata then, together with the spinal cord, are involved in controlling all reflex actions. We'll talk about reflex actions later on. Again, the medulla oblongata is involved in controlling all involuntary. This time we are looking at involuntary actions. Actions that are not under the control of the will. You don't decide before your heart beats, for example. Means you don't control it. So it controls heart rate, breathing rate, that's breathing, blinking of the eyes, coughing, sneezing, and included to that reflex actions. So those are the functions of the medulla oblongata. In the medulla oblongata, in this area here, while nerve fibers are going up, the nerve fibers will cross each other as they are coming from the rest of the body upwards. They cross each other in the medulla oblongata, such that, that's what gives us the effect that we observe, such that the left cerebral hemisphere controls the right side of the body, and the right cerebral hemisphere will then control the left side of the body, vice versa, because of that crossing of nerve fibers happening where? Happening at the level of medulla oblongata. While nerve fibers are going up through the medulla oblongata, they pass via two routes. We have from the sensory parts of the body, from the receptors, from the sense organs, we have nerve fibers running from the sense organs or from the rest of the body, passing upwards, going towards the central nervous system. They pass through an afferent, starts with A, an afferent route. And when information is sent from the central nervous system back to the body, they pass again through a second route. Now we are having the efferent. Comes now with an E. Now pass through the efferent route. So again, A first is going upwards, and E second in alphabetical order coming downwards. These two roads pass through the medulla oblongata. Okay, so that's the medulla oblongata. Next is the spinal cord. The spinal cord is just an extension of the brain. So it's just, if you're looking at the brain, we see it extending, passing right down to the rest of the body. And the spinal cord passes inside the vertebral canal, the vertebral column, or the backbone. That's why we find the spinal cord passing inside there, the backbone. The spinal cord has 31 pairs of nerves that we refer to as the spinal nerves. 31 pairs of nerves passing inside the spinal cord, and which exit the spinal cord between the bones that form the vertebral column. These are the bones that form the vertebral canal, and this is the spinal cord passing. Spinal cord passing inside here. We see an opening here. That's the spinal cord that passes inside that opening. Okay, the spinal cord will pass inside this opening here. The bones then of the vertebral column will act as a protective shield to protect the spinal cord from injuries. Added to that, if we can remember, we have the meninges. Remember, the meninges are 3 membranes that surround the whole central nervous system from the brain to the spinal cord, like 3 plastic bags. Remember, 1, 2, and 3 plastic bags, 3 meninges. We said we always remember them as DAP, D-A-P, dura mater, arachnoid, and pia mater. So the spinal cord is also protected by those 3 membranes. And remember again, between the arachnoid and the pia mater, in the subarachnoid space, we have CSF, cerebrospinal fluid. And we should remember the functions are exactly like those of amniotic fluid. Okay. Now, within the spinal cord, if we were to cut the spinal cord into a cross section, it means we are cutting the spinal cord this way into 2, so that we look at it from inside like this. Cutting the whole column, the vertebral column with the spinal cord together. We're looking at it from the inside like this. This is the kind of diagram that we'll be having of the spinal cord. We will notice that in the spinal cord, the different parts of the spinal cord, we will have a dorsal root. This is more or less like your back. A dorsal root that passes through your back, a road through which nerves will pass through your back. And we will have a ventral root, another road that nerves will pass now through your belly, like from the direction of facing your belly, or this part that is in connection with your belly. So we have a part with your back that's dorsal, and we have a part that faces your belly that is ventral. These are 2 roads, such that each time that they exit, each time that these nerves will exit the spinal cord, they will exit the spinal cord in between, in the region or the space in between the vertebrae. You will see these are the different vertebrae here. 2 vertebrae, for example. The space that we have here will be the exit and entry point of the nerves from the vertebrae. So we have them here, exit and exit, passing through the dorsal and ventral roots. Now, within the spinal cord, we will also identify 2 regions. 2 regions. Here, we will have gray matter. Don't mind, it is drawn kind of whitish, but it's actually gray matter, which forms a typical H shape. Looks like an H. And if we have gray matter, then surrounding this gray matter, of course, in this area here, we should be having white matter, medulla, and the cortex gray matter. And something to notice here is the fact that this time, unlike with the cerebrum and the cerebellum, this time gray matter is on the inside and white matter is on the outside. So the roles have been reversed. Please be careful then with this question. They could ask you the question to identify the different positions of structure G and W, identify their positions in the cerebrum and their positions in the spinal cord. In the cerebrum, you will say that G is outside, W is inside. But in the spinal cord, you say that G is outside and W is inside. Oh, sorry, G is inside in the spinal cord and W this time is outside. So gray matter in the spinal cord is inside and white matter is outside. If we look at the spinal cord, in somewhere around the center here, somewhere around the center, we will identify a small structure, like a small hole. Okay, just there. That's what we call the central canal. Okay, the central canal. If you remember the central canal, I mentioned it when we were looking at the ventricles or the cavities that we find inside the cerebrum. I said inside the cerebrum, there are more or less 4 openings, 4 cavities inside the cerebrum. And these 4 cavities somehow merge up and continue as one. And that one flows straight inside the spinal cord. So it means if we now, like I said earlier, if we now cut the spinal cord into 2, we then expect, if we are looking at the cross section facing us, we should then expect to find that opening right there. That will be then the central canal. That will be the opening. And inside the central canal, there is also CSF, cerebrospinal fluid, that flows within the central canal. And this is what is usually extracted during a lumbar puncture when they inject. They put in the huge syringe at the lower vertebrae, around the lumbar, between the lumbar and the sacral region, between the lumbar and the sacral region of your column, vertebral column. They extract that liquid to then check if there's any source of infection within the CSF that's found in the spinal cord that could be leading you to some kind of nervous deficiencies or disease. That's what they extract, the CSF found inside the central canal. So like I said earlier, the spinal cord mainly functions in controlling all reflex actions, and it shares this function with the medulla oblongata, that is spinal cord. The spinal cord also receives nerves from the peripheral nervous system. It also has nerves that are connected to the peripheral nervous system, and it then receives signals coming from the peripheral nervous system. Okay.